Hi everyone, Adrian Groenewald here of Global Leadership Platform, of course. It's great to be with you, and this is our Global Leadership Conversation series, this being the first conversation all over the world with experts and leadership influencers to talk about the global leadership crisis that we're facing. And I've got with me a special guest, Dr. Marcel Hattingh. He's the CEO of CCI Professional, a human capital investment and leadership development platform. He's been in this game for many years and very equipped to give us his views on the global leadership crisis. Marcel, very good to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's great joining in also with a global leadership platform today.
Marcel, there we go. Define the global leadership crisis. Describe to us how you see it.
I think if you walk through history, a leadership crisis is definitely not something new. Every age, every nation, every culture, as far as we study leadership from the monarchical ages of kings and queens, right through the modern day systems of nationalities and politics. A crisis on a leadership front has always been a central challenge towards the world. Perhaps one reference to a book that I recently read, it's a book with the title Why Nations Fail by Acemoglu and Robinson. If I remember correctly, these are two professors from Yale and Harvard, or some of the Ivy Leagues in the US. And they consider about 6,000 years of history of what are some of the variables why certain nations get it right when they actually are on an incline. Take, for instance, North and South Korea as two case studies, or Rome in the ancient days as a republic versus an empire. And working through a lot of myths, they come to kind of a central conclusion that there are most probably just one or two critical variables that is required in a leadership development process or a leadership crisis to help move towards a better outcome. And we can talk about that perhaps a little bit later on during the discussion. But from my point of view, if we look at the current state of the world, many people would be aware that we are constantly talking about a new industrial revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution, which is most probably one of the most complex issues within modern day civilization that we are about to face. Look, every revolution that we've gone through have had a certain effect on the complexity of life, the pace of life, the amount of unknown variables, the ambiguity. They talk about a VUCA world. But there is an interesting pattern that with every revolution, there is a factor of increase in complexity and all of this. People are estimating that the effect of the fourth industrial revolution will most probably be 100-fold upwards on the ordinary citizen, whether it's a first world or a third world country, that we will just experience. And I think with all of this complexity, the global leadership crisis that we are facing is twofold. The one side is, how do we deal with the complexities? Because our traditional systems approach is no longer work. I mean, to take one example again, if you take a company like Nokia, the cell phone manufacturers, 10 years, 15 years ago, one of the leaders in the game with a very nice pipeline thinking. But all of a sudden, there was a new model on the platform side towards Android and towards ISO. And we had to change our models. We had to change our way of thinking. The old stuff, unfortunately, just doesn't work anymore. So with the leadership crisis, it's the adapting, it's the propensity towards change that we need to consider. How can leaders adapt to this new environment? I think that's the one side. The other side of this whole industry, I think, is really an ethical and a moral issue. Being part of the South African context and also working into Africa quite a lot, we see a moral degeneration, a values brokenness, a systemic brokenness of society. And unfortunately, it seems that even on a global scale, our leaders are generally not really either focusing on those elements, or in themselves, there are levels of brokenness that unfortunately contributes very negatively towards a global leadership crisis. So perhaps to summarize, I think it's the complexity issues with the industrial revolutions and all the changes we're seeing on the other side. I think there's definitely a moral, value ethical challenge that our global leadership crisis is facing.
Okay. I was going to interrupt you earlier and say, who is Nokia? I mean, it's just
cute. Yes. We try and teach our children history, and Nokia and Kodak and these guys pops up in our history lessons these days.
It's honestly, they were kings, and he's a brilliant example in our modern day history of the challenge we all face. All right, that's a wonderful summary, Dr. Hattingh. I really appreciate that. Now, in the context of that being the leadership crisis, the global leadership crisis, what would you say is the most important quality or attribute that we need to elevate, or that we need to develop or awaken or improve in leaders if we are going to somehow address this global leadership crisis?
Yeah, that's what I would call a trick question. I'm thinking of my first year undergraduate programs in leadership. We do a little exercise. I give them a whole sheet with about, I guess there's 50 or 60 different descriptions of leadership. And then I tell them, pick the top 3 descriptions of leadership. I mean, all of those things are relevant towards leadership. So to highlight one single component, it's quite challenging, but I'll take a stab at it. In light of, I think, my previous response towards the complexity in all of this. In my development phases, I grew up in a very industrial kind of environment. And the models of leadership that was portrayed to me was the typical industrial managers. And somehow people got confused that management and leadership started equating to each other, and it's completely different sciences. The one is a science of things, systems, policies, procedures. The other one is a science of humans and the understanding of the complexity of humans. And one thing that became very clear to me as I evolved in my own development of leadership is if you try and imitate something, somebody, some system that is not authentic to who you are, guaranteed you're going to run into problems sooner or later. There's been one leadership fad after the next. Then we talk about charismatic leadership in the 90s. Then we talk about transformational leaders in the 2000s. Then we're back to the servant leadership bandwagon. And the challenge, quite frankly, is if you are not naturally made up, your psychology, your neurological framing, your behavioral patterns are not conducive with that kind of leadership style and the kind of leadership requirement, you are imitating something that is unauthentic. So the one quality that I perhaps would highlight, and I'll explain this by an interesting story that happened a year or two ago at a conference that I was addressing, is what I would call authentic leadership. And let me perhaps describe this concept by the little story. I was invited to, sorry,
Marcel, just you cut out a little bit there. You said authentic leadership. There was some other word there.
Okay. That was basically what I would call the quality, being an authentic leader.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So to describe the term, or what do I mean by authentic leadership? Because there is an academic theory that defines authentic leadership. It's been around since about 2005. But about 2-3 years ago, I was a speaker at a conference with different universities that came together here in Pretoria, South Africa. And I was unfortunately engaged with a prior function down in the Cape Province. So I could only do the final session on the Saturday afternoon before all the delegates went into their gala event. I arrived early at the venue, just kind of as lunchtime was wrapping up. And one of the professors, who was one of the, I suppose, one of the celebrity figures at the conference, one of the VIPs, came to me, introduced himself, a very distinguished gentleman. And with a little bit of a grin on his face, he asked me, what kind of leadership theory am I going to sell to these guys? And I thought that's a strange question. What kind of leadership theory? And you could obviously see I was a little bit dazzled by the question. So he started off by saying, on Thursday morning, we had a brilliant speaker. It was a lady from the city of Tshwane who spoke to us about ethical leadership. And the kind of the heart of the message, if you're not an ethical leader right now, then you're missing the bus. He said then the Friday morning, we had another speaker from one of the universities. He was talking about transformational leadership. And if you're not a transformational leader, you're kind of missing it. And I was already seeing where this was going, because the speaker before the lunchtime was talking about servant leadership. Basically, it was the same theme. If you're not a servant leader, you're kind of missing it. So I just smiled at the gentleman and I said, sir, you'll just need to wait and see what my sales pitch on leadership will be. Well, my session started. Fortunately, gave me a good little icebreaker to make a joke about this. But the core of the conversation then was to say, ladies and gentlemen, we're not here to talk about any specific leadership model or any specific leadership theory. We're here to talk about you and who you are. I believe every person has got a design, every person has got a created purpose, every person has got a unique pattern that makes you the individual who you are. The best way to live life is to figure out through whatever way. For some people, that's a religious expression. For some people, it's a spiritual expression. For some, it's a social expression. It might be a political expression. I'm not here to talk about the means you want to figure out your identity, calling, and purpose. But it is very clear within all domains of society that the better you understand who you are and live that out authentically, chances that you're going to be successful, chances that you're going to have high levels of impact, chances that you are really just going to have fulfillment in doing that is so much better than trying to imitate a style or a behavior that's not conducive and natural to who you are. If you are most suited to be a benevolent dictator, well, great, then be the best benevolent dictator that you can be. I'm most probably not going to work with you or be friends with you or whatever, but at least the environments that you're supposed to go in, go and be the best leader in that context. I tell our team and our partners quite often, I'm definitely not a servant leader. It's not my makeup. It's not my background. I'm not wired in the sense of servant leadership. Do I understand how to serve my people? Well, I'll not respond to that. Anybody can ask anybody in CCI Professional whether I do serve my people. I believe it's an extremely high value. But my leadership patterning is much more what they would call a parental leader, something you find more in the Eastern and the Middle Eastern context. It's a very much a family environment. It's very much a clan or a social culture that we have. I fit that kind of description, and I'm most comfortable to be that kind of leader. So for me to address the topic or the issue, what do I believe is the one central aspect that is a non-negotiable amongst various aspects of leadership, is the fact that we need to help young leaders discover, first of all, who they are, and then what leadership pattern, what leadership model, what leadership behavior is most conducive with who you are, and not constantly trying to live up to expectation that's outside of your authentic makeup.
Powerful. Yeah. And that leads me into our almost main question that says, how do we best develop, awaken, or improve this quality in leaders? And you've answered some of it, I guess, because it is about discovering who you are. And you said you can't always prescribe the journey you take to find out who you are, your authentic me, that real I. But maybe just wrap up the conversation with how best do you think one could, over and above your authentic journey. So if I happen to be a Musi Maimani who falls into politics, then within that environment, I have to find who I am. If I happen to have grown up in a home where my dad is a multi-billionaire entrepreneur, so that's the environment I'm going to grow up in, and I must find my authentic self within that parameter in a way. So over and above the macro environment that will lead me down my path, how can I, a little bit more, find out who am I? How do you do it in your leadership programs, for example? Just a minute on that.
First of all, I would say that is not easy. I'm reminded of a book by Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled, many years ago, that he starts off with the opening paragraph, life is difficult. But as he wraps the paragraph up, now that you understand life is difficult, it just became a little bit more easy. Paraphrasing just these words. And I think it's the same with discovering of identity, calling, and purpose. It is a complex thing. And I would have given what when my children was born that somehow miraculously next to them, the manual, appeared. What am I supposed to do with my son and my daughter? But I believe, there are two elements that is quite critical. I am trained also in the world of natural sciences and biology, and I believe in a genetic imprint. Every one of us have got certain genetic markers, and there are various ways how you discover your potential, discover talents, discover abilities that are pretty much genetically impressed, whether you do that through some medical intervention, a good coach, a good mentor, whether you're on a training program or a course, there are good systems and tools aligned to help us to understand that generic imprint or genetic imprint. But on the other side also, I think it's critical to understand that every one of us have a unique journey and unique experiences. And that unique journey and those unique experiences shapes and form us. In the biological world, that is known as your phenotype or your environment. And the kind of people that you surround yourself with, the reference that you used, you might grow up in the household of a billionaire or whatever. that shapes the psychology. It shapes the patterns of who you are. If you are a person who are really seriously committed to find out more about who you are, your calling, your purpose, I think it's a requirement that you associate yourself with other people who are like-minded. Spend time with mentors, spend time with people that's going to guide you in life, spend time with people that's investing in elements of self-discovery and self-mastery in order to grow and develop and really just come to the realization of what those things mean. So both genetic and phenotypical, I think there are two sides to the story that one has to take in consideration.
Dr. Marcel Hattingh,
Yeah.
it's been refreshing. It's been exceptionally interesting listening to you. And I
Thank
think
you so much.
People will pick up on your authentic contribution that you make. Your voice is out there now for our Hash Global Leadership Conversation 1. I'm excited and hope that we'll have a conversation 2 in due course. And we really appreciate your time. And thank you for the good work you're doing. Keep it up, and look forward to partnering more on this global crisis that we're facing. I can sense that the world needs you and your team desperately.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great engaging also and adding our voice and the little bit of expertise that we've got that we can contribute to this vast question. And I so appreciate the concept. It's a global crisis. It's a global conversation, and we need to add, I think, voices to the conversation that helps us to view this from so many different angles and dimensions. So thank you for the opportunity. It was great journeying with you guys today.
Dr. Marcel Hattingh, CEO of CCI Professional. Thank you for your time. Cheers. All the best.
Thank you.